Businessman was spending his birthday alone until a poor mother asked to stay. Richard Miller looked at the small cake on the kitchen table as the clock struck midnight. At 45 years old, he ran one of the largest construction companies in New York City, but he didn't have a single person to share that special moment with. That's when the doorbell rang insistently, 3 times in a row. When he opened the door, Richard was faced with a woman drenched by the heavy rain that had been falling for hours, holding the hand of a boy about 6 years old who was shivering from the cold. "Please, sir," said the woman with a choked voice, "I know it's very late, but can my son and I come in just until the rain stops? We have nowhere to stay tonight." The businessman hesitated. He had never been in a situation like this before. The boy was coughing softly and his lips were purple from the cold. Something in the mother's desperate look made him step aside. "Come in," he said, watching how the woman held her son carefully. "Thank you so much, sir. You don't know how much this means to us," she replied, relieved. Richard led them to the living room. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Johnson and explained that the boy's name was Michael. She said they lived in a rented apartment in the Chinatown neighborhood, but the roof had collapsed during the afternoon storm. "We managed to get out with only the clothes on our backs," explained Sarah, trying to dry her son's wet hair with her hands. "The neighbor said it could take a few days to fix, depending on the damage." The businessman went to get towels and prepared hot tea. While waiting for the water to boil, he watched out of the corner of his eye how the woman cared for her son. She took off her own wet jacket and covered the boy, even though she was freezing. When he returned with the hot drinks, Michael was staring intently at the untouched cake on the kitchen table. Sarah noticed and tried to distract her son, but the boy asked innocently, "Mister, is it your birthday today?" Richard was embarrassed. Admitting he was alone on his own birthday seemed pathetic. "Yes, it is," he replied softly. To his surprise, Michael jumped off the sofa and began to sing "Happy Birthday" with genuine enthusiasm, clapping off-beat. Sarah tried to make him stop, embarrassed, but Richard felt something strange in his chest. It had been years since anyone had sung "Happy Birthday" to him. "Can you blow out the candles?" asked the boy, excited. Richard smiled for the first time that night and blew out the 3 small candles. Michael applauded as if it were the most important thing in the world. During the night, while mother and son rested on the living room sofa, Richard lay awake thinking. It had been a long time since his house had felt so alive. The sound of the 2 people's calm breathing downstairs was comforting in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, he woke up to a different smell coming from the kitchen. Sarah had made breakfast with the few ingredients she found in the businessman's almost empty refrigerator. "I hope you don't mind," she said a little shyly. "I wanted to repay your kindness in some way." On the table there was a drawing made by Michael, 3 stick figures around a cake. Below it, written in a child's handwriting, "Happy Birthday, Richard." "Michael made this for you," explained Sarah. "He said you seemed sad yesterday." The businessman was moved by the simple gesture. He suggested they stay a few more days until they found another place or their apartment was repaired. Sarah hesitated, but Richard's gentle insistence convinced her. Over coffee, he discovered that Sarah had a degree in business administration, but worked as a cleaner in 3 different places to support her son. "Michael's father. He left when he found out about the pregnancy," she explained without bitterness in her voice. "Since then, it's just been him and me against the world." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It's a huge help for us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The following days completely transformed Richard's routine. The house, once silent and cold, was now full of life. Michael ran through the wide hallways, played in the garden that had never been used, and asked questions about everything. Sarah kept everything organized and prepared meals that Richard savored, as if it were the first time he'd eaten real food. A week later, when Richard came home after a particularly difficult day at the office, he found Sarah reorganizing his chaotic library. She had created an efficient system, separating the books by subject and creating clear labels. "I noticed you have a lot of important books, but it was all a bit messy," she explained. "I hope you don't mind. When I cleaned offices, I always saw how organization made a difference in productivity. Richard was impressed. The organization was perfect, better than any secretary had ever done. "Sarah, I need to make you a proposal," he said. "How would you like to work at my company? I need someone competent to organize some projects." Her expression closed off immediately. "I don't want charity, Richard," she replied firmly. "We've already done enough of that in your home." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's a job offer. You have a talent for this." After much insistence, Sarah agreed, but on one condition. She would do a 2-week trial period to prove her capability. If it didn't work out, she would leave with no hard feelings. On her first day at the office, Sarah made an immediate impact. Dressed in simple but impeccably neat clothes, she reorganized the old filing system where no one had been able to find anything for months. Within 3 days, she implemented a control system that identified several flaws in the company's processes. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some executives began to question her closeness to the boss. Malicious comments circulated through the hallways about the cleaning lady who became a manager overnight. The situation became more complicated when Henry, Richard's son, who lived in London and hadn't visited his father in years, called furiously after hearing from a cousin about the strangers living in the family mansion. "Dad, have you lost your mind?" Henry shouted over the phone. "Some random woman with a son living in my mother's house?" "Your mother has been gone for 8 years, Henry," Richard replied sadly. "And you've never cared to visit the house since then." "That's beside the point. This woman is obviously taking advantage of you. What if it's a scam? What if she's after your money?" The conversation ended with Henry promising to return to the United States to sort this situation out. Richard hung up the phone with a heavy heart, remembering how his relationship with his son had deteriorated after the loss of his wife. Sarah could tell something was wrong when Richard came home that night quieter than usual. Michael, with the typical sensitivity of children, also noticed and drew a son to cheer up Uncle Richard. "Did something happen at work?" Sarah asked during dinner. Richard told her about the call from his son. To his surprise, she wasn't offended, just thoughtful. "I understand his concern," she said. "If I had a father, I'd also worry if a stranger suddenly appeared in his life out of nowhere." "You're not a stranger," Richard replied. You're my family now." The words came out before he could think, but Richard realized they were true. Sarah and Michael had filled a void he didn't even know existed. At work, things got worse when some important clients began to question Sarah's presence in strategic meetings. One of them, Mr. Armstrong, was especially cruel. "Richard, you've always been a serious man in business. I don't understand why you're mixing personal life with the company, especially with someone without adequate qualifications." Richard felt his blood boil, but Sarah interrupted him before he could respond. "Mr. Armstrong," she said in a calm but firm voice, "you're right to question my qualifications. I don't have an MBA or a diploma hanging on the wall, but I have something many executives don't. The experience of someone who truly knows every penny spent, every process that can be optimized, and every dollar that can be saved. When you clean offices for years, you learn to see waste that goes unnoticed by those who never had to fight for every opportunity." The silence in the room was broken by Mr. Armstrong himself. "What proposal do you have to optimize our costs then?" What followed was an improvised presentation by Sarah about how to reorganize the construction company's suppliers based on observations she had made over years of cleaning different companies. The projected savings were 30% in operational costs. When the meeting ended, Mr. Armstrong shook Sarah's hand. "Perhaps I was mistaken about your qualifications, young lady. Life experience is worth more than many diplomas." That evening, Richard took Sarah and Michael to dinner at an elegant restaurant to celebrate. It was during dessert that Michael asked a question that changed everything. "Uncle Richard, why don't you have children?" "I have a son," replied Richard. "But he lives far away and we don't talk much." "Why?" insisted the boy with the innocent curiosity of children. Richard sighed. How to explain to a child the complexity of a relationship that he himself didn't fully understand? Sometimes when we lose someone very important, We get so sad that we forget to take care of those who are still close to us, he said, choosing his words carefully. Michael thought for a moment before answering. When I get sad, my mum hugs me. Have you tried hugging your son? The simplicity of the question hit Richard like a punch. When was the last time he had shown affection to his own son? 3 days later, Henry landed in New York City. At 28, he was a successful young executive who had inherited his father's emotional coldness, but not his ability to build professional relationships. The first meeting was tense. Henry arrived at his father's house expecting to find an opportunist, but instead found Sarah preparing lunch while helping Michael with his homework at the kitchen table. "You must be Henry," said Sarah, wiping her hands on her apron. "Your father talks about you a lot." "I doubt it," replied Henry dryly. "My father hasn't talked about feelings in years." Michael looked at the young man with curiosity. "Are you Uncle Richard's son? Why do you never visit him?" The child's direct question disarmed Henry for a moment. "I live very far away," he said, less aggressive. "But you can take a plane, right? When I grow up, I'll visit my mom every day, even if I live far away." During lunch, the tension was palpable. Henry asked direct questions about Sarah's intentions, while Richard tried to mediate the situation. It was Michael who unknowingly broke the ice. "Henry, do you want to see the drawing I made of your father? He was very sad before we came here." The boy ran to get his drawings. There were several. Richard alone at the big table, Richard smiling with them, Richard working late at the office. Each drawing told a story Henry had never considered, the profound loneliness of his father. "He gets sad when you don't call," said Michael with the brutal honesty of children. "My mom says that missing someone hurts in your chest." For the first time in years, Henry saw his father as a vulnerable human being, not just as the cold man who had distanced himself after their mother's loss. The real conversation between father and son happened that night, after Sarah and Michael had gone to sleep. Richard served the whiskey he saved for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. "I didn't know how to handle your pain when your mother passed away," admitted Richard. "I thought working more, being more successful, would somehow fill the void. I ended up pushing away the only person I had left of her." "And I thought you didn't care," Henry replied. "That I was just a painful reminder of Mom." "You are the best memory I have of her," Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. "Your smile, your way of laughing, it's all her in you." It was the first real conversation they had had in 8 years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days that followed, Henry began to observe the household dynamics with new eyes. He saw how Sarah took care of Richard without expecting anything in return, how Michael brought genuine joy to the environment, and how his father had transformed into a more human version of himself. The first crisis came when Michael fell ill at school. The teacher called, worried because the boy had fainted during recess. Sarah rushed out of work, and Richard went with her to the hospital. The tests revealed something Sarah already suspected but hoped was wrong. Michael had a congenital heart condition that required specialized and expensive treatment. "How much does the surgery cost?" Richard asked the doctor. "About $80,000, not including the preparatory tests and post-operative care," replied the cardiologist. Sarah paled. It was more money than she could save in an entire lifetime. "I'll pay," Richard said without hesitation. "No," Sarah replied firmly. "We've already taken too much from you. I can't accept." "Michael is practically my grandson," Richard argued. "Let me take care of him." "He is not your grandson," Sarah countered, her eyes welling up, "and I can't spend my life owing favors." The argument continued down the hospital corridor until Henry interrupted. What if it wasn't a favor? What if it was a loan with repayment terms? Henry's idea was to create a formal contract where Sarah would pay the amount in installments deducted from her salary over 10 years, with symbolic interest. That way, she would maintain her dignity while Michael received the necessary treatment. But during the night, Sarah and Michael disappeared. They left only a note thanking them for everything, saying they didn't want to be a burden. Richard was desperate. The search began at the damaged apartment where they had been living. The ceiling had indeed collapsed, But Richard discovered the damage was less severe than Sarah had described. Talking to neighbors, he learned she had been evicted 3 times in the last year for late rent. Following clues, Richard and Henry searched shelters, public hospitals, and even under overpasses. It was a journey that showed Henry a side of the city he had never seen, even though he was born there. They finally found them in a cheap boarding house on the outskirts of New York City. Michael was visibly worse, with bluish lips and labored breathing. Sarah had spent the last dollars she had on medicine that only relieved the symptoms. "Why did you run away?" Richard asked, unable to hide the pain in his voice. "Because you've already done too much for us," Sarah replied. "And I can't keep accepting charity." "It's not charity," Henry said. "It's family taking care of family." It was then that the truth came out. Sarah confessed that it hadn't been a coincidence that she showed up at Richard's door that rainy night. She had known his routine for months, since she cleaned the building next to his, and saw him come home alone every night. "I knew today was your birthday because I heard your assistant commenting," she said through tears. "I knew you would be alone, as always. I bet that someone who understood loneliness would have compassion for a desperate mother." The apartment really did have problems with the rain, but not as much as I said. I made up the story because I needed help and didn't have the courage to ask directly. Richard felt betrayed for a moment, but then understood the desperate situation that had led Sarah to take this action. "You deceived me," he said slowly. "I did," she admitted, "and I regret it. But I didn't lie about the affection I feel for you, about how Michael has become attached, or about how much you two have transformed our lives." Michael, who had been listening to the whole conversation in silence, approached Richard. "Uncle Richard, are you mad at Mommy?" Richard looked at that fragile child, who even when sick worried more about other people's feelings than his own condition. "No, Michael, I'm not mad. I'm sad because you left without telling us. Mommy said we were bothering you too much. You never bothered us. You made my life better." Richard turned to Sarah. "You did what any mother would do to protect her son. I can't blame you for that. But now we're going to take care of Michael, and you're going to accept our help because we're family, real family." The drive back home was emotional. Michael slept in Richard's lap while Henry drove. Sarah watched out the window, still processing the forgiveness she had received. "Richard," she said softly, "there's one more thing you need to know." She told him about the notebooks where she wrote down every penny spent, every job opportunity she had lost because she had nowhere to leave Michael, every night she stayed awake thinking about how to give her son a better life. "I had been watching you for months," she confessed. "I saw how you came home tired, how you ate alone at the corner restaurant, how you looked at families in the park with a sadness I recognized. I thought that maybe we could heal each other's loneliness." "And we did," Richard replied, squeezing her hand. Michael's surgery was scheduled for the following week. During the days of preparation, Richard discovered more details about Sarah's life that impressed him. She regularly donated blood to earn extra money for her son's medicine. She participated in medical research when they needed volunteers. She crocheted during the early morning hours to sell and supplement her income. "How did you find time for all that?" he asked. "A mother finds time for everything when it's for her child," she replied simply. Henry, who had decided to stay longer in the United States, began visiting his father's house regularly. Michael's presence delighted him. The boy asked questions about London, about airplanes, about what it was like to work in another country. "When I grow up, can I work with you?" Michael asked one day. "Of course you can," Henry replied, "but first you need to study hard and get strong and healthy. Uncle Richard said you are very smart, just like him." "Your Uncle Richard never told me that," Henry replied, surprised. "He talks about you when you're not here. He says he's very proud, but that he misses you." These innocent conversations from Michael were rebuilding the relationship between father and son, brick by brick. The surgery was a success, but the recovery was slow. During the long hours at the hospital, Richard and Henry took turns keeping Sarah company. It was during one of these vigils that Richard met other families in similar situations. Mrs. Margaret, 70 years old, was taking care of her grandson alone. who had the same heart condition as Michael. She shared that the boy had lost his parents in an accident and that she worked as a street vendor to pay for his treatment. Mr. Joseph was a construction worker and had gone into debt to treat his 8-year-old daughter. He worked 18 hours a day, including weekends, and still couldn't cover all the costs. These stories deeply moved Richard. During one of these conversations, an idea began to form in his mind, and it was Sarah who verbalized it first. "Have you ever thought about using your construction knowledge to help these people in some way?" "How so?" asked Richard. "You have empty buildings around the city. What if you converted some of them into affordable housing for families who need to be near hospitals during long-term treatments?" The idea was revolutionary. A concept of social housing that included healthcare services, daycare for the children, and even job opportunities for the parents. "Would that work?" asked Henry, interested. "It would," replied Sarah. "I saw many of these families during the years I brought Michael to his appointments. Many come from far away and spend on hotels the money that should be for treatment. Others sleep on the street or in waiting rooms." Richard got excited about the possibility. He started doing calculations, drawing blueprints, imagining how it could be financially viable. "We would need partnerships with the healthcare system, with social organizations," he murmured. "And we would need someone who truly understands the needs of these families to coordinate everything," said Henry, looking meaningfully at Sarah. The idea evolved during Michael's weeks of recovery. Richard used his contacts to verify the legal and financial feasibility of the project. Henry brought similar international experiences he had learned about in London, and Sarah contributed with the practical knowledge of someone who had lived through the difficulties the project aimed to solve. When Michael was discharged, they were already a true family working on a shared dream. The boy, still recovering but visibly better, helped by making drawings of how he imagined the house for families who need help would look. The first obstacle came from Richard's own partners at the construction company. In a tense meeting, they questioned using company resources on a social project that might not yield a financial return. "Richard, you're mixing heart with business," said Mark, his partner of 15 years. "This could compromise our profitability." "Our profitability has never been better," Richard countered. "And if we don't use our success to make a difference, what's the point of having so much money?" The discussion went on for hours. Some partners threatened to leave the company, others proposed doing the project only as a marketing action without real commitment. It was then that Sarah asked to speak at the meeting. Wearing a suit borrowed from Richard's former secretary, she presented a detailed business plan that turned the social project into a profitable opportunity. "Imagine small but functional apartments, rented for symbolic amounts to families undergoing medical treatment," she explained. "The federal government has subsidy programs for this type of housing. Families pay according to their income, and the state supplements the amount. Furthermore, we would have partnerships with pharmacies, labs, and clinics that would benefit from the concentrated demand. A percentage of these partnerships would return to maintain the enterprise. And most importantly, we would build a support network where families who have been through similar situations help others who are starting the process. This reduces social assistance costs." The plan was so well structured that the partners were impressed. Mark, who had been the most resistant, was the first to admit, "Sarah, this is better put together than many proposals from the consulting firms we've hired." "Because it was made by someone who lived the problem," she replied. "Theoretical consulting doesn't replace practical experience." The project was approved unanimously. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The project's implementation brought new challenges. Richard discovered that dealing with government bureaucracy was more complex than constructing buildings. Henry used his international contacts to attract investors interested in social impact projects, and Sarah became the bridge between the technical side and the real needs of the families. During this period, Michael became a sort of project mascot. He would draw, give ideas about what children would like to have in the apartments, and even test the functionality of the planned spaces. "There needs to be a place where mothers can see the courtyard from the kitchen window," he said one day, analyzing the blueprints. "Why?" asked Richard. so they don't get worried when we're playing. These simple yet precise observations made all the difference in the final project. The first unit was ready 6 months later. It was a 4-story building in the Upper East Side neighborhood, close to several hospitals. Each floor had 8 small but complete apartments, with a central community space where families could meet. The ground floor housed a daycare center, a partner pharmacy, a small market with affordable prices, and a hall for meetings and activities. The inauguration was emotional. Mrs. Margaret was the first resident, along with her grandson who was still undergoing cardiac follow-up. Mr. Joseph got an apartment for himself and his daughter, who was recovering well from surgery. "I never thought it would be possible," said Mrs. Margaret, emotional during the ceremony. "A dignified place near the hospital, where I don't have to choose between paying rent or buying medicine." Richard, Sarah, Henry, and Michael cut the ribbon together. The local press covered the event, highlighting how a private company had created an innovative model for social housing. But the success also brought unwanted attention. Some politicians tried to take credit for the project for their election campaigns. Competing business owners spread rumors that Richard was using the social project to evade taxes. The hardest part was when a sensationalist newspaper published a malicious article suggesting that Sarah was an opportunist who had manipulated Richard for her own benefit. The article included photos of her entering the construction company and insinuations about the nature of their relationship. "Cleaning lady becomes director overnight. Love or interest," was the headline. Sarah was devastated. She even offered to resign so as not to harm Richard or the project. "If my presence is causing trouble, I'll leave," she said, her eyes red from crying. "You're not going anywhere," Richard replied firmly. "We'll face this together." The response came unexpectedly. The families who benefited from the project spontaneously mobilized. Mrs. Margaret organized a petition, signed by all the residents, refuting the accusations and defending Sarah. Mr. Joseph gave an emotional interview on television. "This woman saved my daughter, not with money, but with knowledge, with kindness, with dedication. Whoever speaks ill of her doesn't know the work she does." The community's support was so strong that the press itself changed the tone of its reporting. Sarah became a symbol of overcoming adversity and dedication. The success of the first venture led to requests to replicate the model in other cities. Richard, Henry, and Sarah traveled through New York City presenting the project to interested mayors and business people. It was during one of these trips that something unexpected happened. They were returning from a meeting in Boston when Richard began to feel chest pains. Henry drove at high speed to the nearest hospital. The diagnosis was the onset of a heart attack caused by the accumulated stress of the previous months. Richard had to be hospitalized for a week. It was during this hospitalization that the roles reversed. Sarah cared for Richard with the same dedication he had shown during Michael's treatment. Henry temporarily took over the construction business, and Michael made drawings to cheer up Grandpa Richard. "You taught me that family is who takes care of us when we need it," said Sarah, as she helped Richard walk through the hospital corridors. "Now it's my turn to care for you." During his recovery, Richard had time to reflect on the changes in his life. A year earlier, he was alone, focused only on work, with no purpose beyond accumulating money. Now he had a family, a project that transformed lives, and the feeling that his existence made a difference in the world. "Henry," he said one day during one of his son's visits, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it, Dad?" "When your mother was sick, she made me promise that I wouldn't close myself off to love. She said life was too short to waste the opportunities to be happy. And then, I broke that promise for 8 years. I closed myself off. I pushed you away. I lived as if I were just waiting for my turn to pass on. Dad, let me finish. Sarah and Michael saved me from an empty life. They showed me that I still had a lot of love to give and receive. And you, my son, showed me that it's never too late to rebuild a relationship." Henry hugged his father tightly. It was the first hug between them since their mother's funeral. When Richard was discharged, he returned home determined to make permanent changes in his life. He proposed an official partnership to Sarah in the social project, with a share in the profits and decisions. He offered an international management position to Henry, allowing him to work between the United States and London, maintaining closeness with his family. But the biggest surprise came during the dinner celebrating Richard's discharge. Michael, who had been particularly quiet during the day, made an announcement. "Uncle Richard, I want to tell you something." "You can tell me, champ. I asked God not to take you like he took my other grandparents, because you are the best grandpa I could have." The boy's words moved everyone at the table. Richard felt that he had finally found his place in the world, but life still had one more surprise in store. 2 months later, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything again. It was from a lawyer, informing her that Michael's father, Brian, had appeared and wanted to meet his son. "Was he in prison all these years?" asked Richard, worried. "No," replied Sarah, still processing the information. "He moved to the countryside when he found out about the pregnancy. The lawyer said he built a new life, has a small business, and now wants to take on his responsibilities." The news left everyone in a state of shock. Michael, who had never known his father, was torn between curiosity and fear. Richard felt afraid of losing the grandson he had learned to love. Henry worried about how this would affect the family dynamic they had fought so hard to build. The first meeting was set in neutral territory, at the park near the new social enterprise. Brian arrived nervous, carrying a poorly wrapped gift. He was a simple man, approximately 35 years old, with hands calloused from working in agriculture. He had the same brown eyes as Michael, and a shy way of speaking. "Michael," he said, kneeling down to the boy's level, "I am your father. I know you don't know me, but I've thought about you every single day I've been away." Michael looked at the man for a long moment before asking, "Why did you leave when I was little?" The direct question disarmed Brian. He looked at Sarah asking for help, but she gestured for him to answer on his own. "Because I was very young and I was afraid I wouldn't be able to take good care of you," he admitted. "I thought it would be better to leave than to be a bad father." "But you didn't know if you were going to be bad," Michael countered with the simple logic of children. "I didn't know," Brian agreed, "and I regret not having tried every single day." The meeting lasted 2 hours. Brian talked about his life out in the country, about the small farm he had, about how he thought of the son he had left behind. Michael asked practical questions. If the farm had animals, if he knew how to drive a tractor, if he planted the fruits that Michael liked. When the meeting was over, Michael said goodbye with a polite but distant wave. On the way back home, he was quiet in the back seat of the car. "What did you think of him?" asked Sarah. "He seems nice," replied Michael, "but I don't feel like he's my dad. Uncle Richard is the one who teaches me things, who takes me to the doctor, who helps me with my homework." Richard felt his heart tighten at the boy's statement. "Michael," he said, "Brian is your real father. He made a mistake, but now he wants to make it right. You can have 2 fathers, him and me." "I can." "Of course you can. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, care, presence." The meetings with Brian became regular. Gradually, Michael grew closer to his biological father, but without distancing himself from Richard. It was a complex situation that required maturity from everyone involved. Brian, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a changed man. He had used the years of absence to grow, study, and prepare himself to be the father he couldn't be at 20. "I don't want to take Michael away from you," he said to Richard during a private conversation. "You are his family. I just want to be part of that family too, if you'll have me." Brian's generosity moved Richard. He proposed something unprecedented, that Brian move to New York City and become part of the social project team, taking care of the urban agriculture program they wanted to implement. "For you understand plants and soil," Richard argued. "We could create community gardens in the developments, teach families how to produce at least some of their own food." The proposal interested Brian, but he had one condition. He didn't want to be treated as charity, just as Sarah had demanded. "I work hard and I know what I'm doing," he said. "If you want my knowledge, pay for my work." Brian's integration into the family wasn't simple. There were moments of jealousy, especially between him and Richard, who competed for Michael's attention. Sarah had to play the role of mediator, reminding everyone that the boy's well-being was what mattered. "Michael needs both of you," she said, during a particularly tense argument. "Richard, you are the man who raised him and saved him. Brian, you are the father he always wanted to know. Stop competing and start collaborating. Sarah's wisdom prevailed. Gradually, Richard and Brian learned to work together, both in raising Michael and in the social project. Michael's first birthday with the complete family was an emotional celebration. The table was full. Richard, Sarah, Henry, Brian, and some of the residents from the social development who had become close friends. Mrs. Margaret made a cornbread cake that Michael loved. Mr. Joseph brought his daughter, who was now completely cured, and played with Michael the whole party. Henry arrived from London with presents and stories from other countries. "Make a wish," said Richard, when Michael got ready to blow out the candles. "I wish for our family to always stay together," said the boy before blowing them out. Everyone was moved by the simplicity and depth of the wish. During the party, Sarah pulled Richard aside to a corner of the room. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Richard grew apprehensive. After so many twists and turns, any serious conversation made him nervous. "What is it?" "I love you," she said simply. Not out of gratitude, not for convenience, but as a woman who loves a man. And I know you feel the same. Richard smiled. It was true. During the months they had lived together, affection and gratitude had transformed into something deeper. "I love you too," he replied, "but I'm afraid of ruining what we've built." "Richard, we've already been through so much together. We've faced illness, media attacks, family problems. We built a business. We raised a family. Do you think a romantic relationship would be harder than all of that?" He laughed at her irrefutable logic. "It wouldn't be. So shall we try? Let's try." The relationship between Richard and Sarah developed naturally. They already lived as a family. They already knew each other deeply. They had already been through crises together. The transition to a romantic relationship was smooth and organic. Michael was overjoyed when he found out that Richard would be officially his stepfather. Henry took a little longer to get used to the idea, but he eventually admitted that he had never seen his father so happy. Brian, initially suspicious, realized that the relationship between Richard and Sarah made the family even more stable and united. 2 years after the first meeting on the rainy night, Richard organized a different birthday party. It wasn't just to celebrate another year of life, but to celebrate the rebirth he had experienced. The party took place in the community hall of the third social enterprise they had built. All the families who had been helped by the project were present, all the employees of the construction company, old friends Richard had reconnected with, and the family he had built. During his speech, Richard told the whole story, how he was alone and bitter on that birthday 2 years ago, how Sarah and Michael had appeared in his life and transformed everything, how he had reconnected with his son, how he had discovered a greater purpose for his life. "I thought success was having a lot of money and working a lot," he said. "I learned that success is having people who care about you. It's making a difference in the lives of others. It's waking up every day wanting to live." Sarah taught me that intelligence isn't about a diploma, but about life wisdom. Michael taught me that love has no age, that a child can have more maturity than an adult, that simple questions have the deepest answers. Henry taught me that it's never too late to ask for forgiveness and start over. Brian taught me that courage is recognizing mistakes and fighting to correct them. And all of you, he said, looking at the families from the project, taught me that happiness is not individual. We are only truly happy when we share that happiness with others. When the party ended and everyone went home, Richard stayed alone in the hall for a few minutes, reflecting on the journey he had lived. Sarah appeared by his side. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that 2 years ago I was alone at home, blowing out the candles on a cake I had bought myself, with no one to share that moment with." "And today?" "Today I have more family than could fit in any house. I have work that makes sense. I have a purpose that makes me get out of bed excited every day. And are you sure you don't regret opening the door that night?" Richard laughed and kissed her forehead. "It was the best decision I've ever made in my life." Michael came running up, still full of energy despite the late hour. "Can I sleep at Grandpa Richard's house tonight?" "You always can," replied Richard, picking the boy up. "And tomorrow will Daddy Brian teach me how to plant tomatoes?" He sure will. And will Uncle Henry tell me stories about London? Absolutely. And will Mommy make that chocolate cake? If you eat all your vegetables at lunch, replied Sarah. Michael laughed and hugged Richard tightly. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, my champion. Henry approached the group. Shall we head home? We have an early meeting tomorrow to discuss the Chicago project. Let's go, Richard agreed. As they were leaving, Richard took one last look at the hall. Displayed there were drawings from the children in the development, photos of the families, certificates of appreciation from city halls, and news articles about the project's success. But what made him proudest was a simple phrase, handwritten by Michael and stuck on the wall. Love lives here. In the car on the way home, Richard reflected on how life could change so completely in such a short time. 2 years earlier, he was a man who was financially successful but emotionally bankrupt. Today, he was a man fulfilled in every way. Sarah, he said during the drive. Yes. Thank you for ringing my doorbell that night. Thank you for opening the door. Michael, sleepy in the back seat, murmured, Thank you for finding each other. Everyone laughed at the boy's simple wisdom. When they arrived at the house that used to be too big for Richard, but was now always full of life, laughter, and love, he paused for a moment at the entrance. What is it? Asked Sarah. Nothing, he replied, smiling. I'm just happy to be home. Home is where we're all together, said Michael, repeating a phrase he'd heard from his mother. Exactly, Richard agreed. And so that family, built by chance, strengthened by challenges and united by true love, went inside for another night of peaceful sleep, knowing that the next day they would have each other, and a world of possibilities ahead. The transformation was complete. The lonely businessman had become a man surrounded by love. The desperate mother had become a woman fulfilled both professionally and personally. The sick boy had become a healthy, happy child. The distant son had become a present and caring man. And the absent father had become part of a larger, more welcoming family than he ever imagined possible. And it had all started with a doorbell ringing on a rainy night when someone had the courage to ask for help, and someone had the generosity to open the door. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming challenges and love. Have you ever been in a similar situation where a simple gesture transformed your life? Do you believe Richard made the right decision by opening the door for Sarah and Michael that night? Leave your opinion in the comments with sincere words. We would be very happy to read about your experience. Don't forget to leave your like and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.